The city of Zellara stretched like a jewel under twin suns, its towers gleaming with a strange, soft light that humans had never seen before. Streets of polished stone wound through plazas filled with creatures of all shapes and sizes, their bodies elegant and their movements precise, like dancers in an endless performance. Among them walked a single human, small by comparison, wearing plain armor that had seen its fair share of battles. Captain Elias Thorne moved carefully, observing everything with a calmness that made him appear out of place. Yet there was a quiet confidence in his stride that even the alien guards noticed. The people around him whispered as he passed. Some mocked the sight of a human in their city, calling him weak, primitive, and unworthy to walk among them. But Elias paid them no attention. Humans had always survived by ignoring disbelief and focusing on action. He had come to Zellara not to prove himself, but to understand. Still, he could feel the curious eyes of the crowd, the tension beneath the surface of the city's polite civility. High above the streets, in the balcony of a magnificent palace that overlooked the central plaza, Princess Viola watched. She was young, proud, and used to being admired by everyone around her. Yet when her eyes fell upon Elias, she could not resist a laugh. "What is that?" she said to herself. Her voice, melodic and sharp, carried across the balcony just enough for the nearest courtiers to hear. A creature from some backwater world, daring to walk among the finest of the Lorian Empire. Elias heard her words, but he made no reaction beyond a calm nod in acknowledgement of her presence. The Empress, Kelara, Viola's mother, watched silently from behind her ornate screen. She was older, regal, and commanding, with eyes that seemed to pierce through any pretense. She had noticed Elias the moment he arrived, and there was something about him that intrigued her. Unlike other humans she had heard about, he did not beg for approval, nor did he seem intimidated by the city's grandeur or its people. The parade began, a ceremonial display of the city's finest guards and performers. Elias moved through the crowd, keeping a careful distance but observing every detail. The aliens were graceful, precise, almost like living machines, yet their elegance was rigid. They valued perfection and expected obedience. Elias understood quickly that here, a misstep could be seen as a weakness, and weakness invited danger. Viola continued to mock him openly. She whispered to her attendants, giggling as she described him as clumsy, odd, and inferior. She expected him to falter, to stumble, to prove her right. But Elias did not flinch. He had faced ridicule before, and he knew that patience was often more powerful than immediate reaction. Then, without warning, the ground shook. The parade came to a sudden halt as mechanical drones, black and gleaming, swept through the city. Their eyes glowed a fierce red, and their movements were precise and deadly. Panic erupted among the citizens, their graceful formations breaking into chaos. Screams filled the streets as the drones began their attack, targeting structures and civilians alike. Elias did not hesitate. His military training took over. He assessed the situation in seconds, noting the drones' patterns and weaknesses. He dashed into the fray, moving with speed and efficiency that surprised even the seasoned Lorian guards. With careful aim, he disabled one drone with a precise throw of a device, which emitted an electromagnetic pulse, freezing its circuits. Another drone advanced on a group of young nobles, and Elias, using their confusion to his advantage, drew them behind a column and shielded them with his body. Viola gasped, her eyes widening in shock. The human she had mocked was not running away or panicking. He was taking charge. He moved among the drones with a strange combination of instinct and strategy, dodging attacks and disabling each threat with intelligence rather than brute force. The crowd watched in disbelief as the small human became a beacon of calm in the chaos. Even some of the alien soldiers began to follow his lead, inspired by his actions. They moved with him, covering civilians, redirecting drones, and protecting the weak. For the first time, many in the city saw a human not as a fragile outsider, but as someone capable of extraordinary skill and courage. High above, Viola's laughter died on her lips. She had expected to see him fail, to confirm her superiority. Instead, she saw a human moving with precision, saving lives and commanding respect without a word. Her heart raced with a mix of astonishment and a strange sense of unease. Empress Kelara's eyes never left Elias. She studied his movements, noting how he thought quickly, adapted to changing circumstances, and acted decisively. Unlike the Lorian warriors who were trained for perfection but struggled with unpredictability, Elias thrived in the chaos. She found herself intrigued. Perhaps this human was worth more than she had first assumed. As the drones retreated, either destroyed or driven back by Elias and the soldiers, the city began to calm. Citizens emerged from hiding, whispering among themselves about the human who had saved them. For the first time, the name Elias Thorn began to spread through Zelara, carried by amazed voices. Viola remained on the balcony, staring. She could not believe what she had just witnessed. The human she had mocked, the one she had expected to fail and look foolish, had instead demonstrated courage, intelligence, and leadership. She clenched her hands, a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration stirring inside her. Later that day, the palace summoned Elias for a formal audience. He walked into the grand hall, his steps measured, his eyes calm. Viola followed, curious despite herself. The hall was filled with nobles and attendants, all waiting to see how the empress would respond. Kilara stood, her presence commanding silence. "Captain Elias Thorn," she said, her voice echoing through the marble hall, "you have demonstrated skill and courage beyond what we expected from humans. You have acted with honor and intelligence, saving our people in a moment of great danger. For this, you have our attention." She remembered the way he had moved, how he had thought quickly, and how he had protected even those she had assumed were expendable. She could not reconcile her previous assumptions with the reality before her. The Empress continued, her gaze shifting briefly to her daughter. "And yet I see that not all of us recognize true courage when we see it." Her tone was sharp, hinting at a lesson yet to come. The rest of the day passed in a blur of discussions, protocols, and careful observation. Elias met with strategists and scholars, sharing insights into human tactics and adaptability. The aliens listened with curiosity, some skeptical, others genuinely intrigued. Viola, however, could not take her eyes off him. Each time he spoke, she noticed small details. The calm in his voice, the way he considered problems from multiple angles, the subtle confidence that did not rely on arrogance. She began to realize that humans were not what she had been taught to believe. They were not weak or primitive. They were different, unpredictable, and capable of extraordinary things. By nightfall, the city had returned to its usual rhythm, though the story of the human soldier spread like wildfire. In the quiet of her chambers, Viola stared out at the city below, her mind racing. She did not want to admit it, but something had shifted inside her. The human she had mocked had shown her a new possibility, one she could not ignore. Elias, meanwhile, sat quietly in his temporary quarters, reviewing the day's events. He knew this was only the beginning. Zelara was a world full of challenges, and the human's reputation here was fragile. But he also knew one truth: humans thrived where others underestimated them. And now he had the attention of an empire, and a princess who had learned, even if reluctantly, that appearances could be deceiving. As the twin suns set over the city, painting the towers in hues of gold and crimson, Elias Thorn prepared for what was to come. The challenge ahead would test him in ways he had not yet imagined, and the eyes of the Lorian Empire would be watching closely. One thing was certain: humans were no longer invisible on Zelara, and their story was only beginning. The morning sun rose over the city of Zelara, casting long shadows between the towers and illuminating the bustling streets below. Despite the chaos from the previous day, life continued with a sense of normalcy, at least on the surface. The citizens whispered among themselves, some still talking about the human who had defended them. His name, Elias Thorn, was being repeated with a mix of disbelief and admiration. Inside the grand palace, preparations were underway for a special ceremony. Empress Kilara had decided to formally test Elias, not as punishment or amusement, but to measure the true potential of this unusual human. She called it a challenge of skill, though in truth it was more than that. It was a demonstration of intelligence, courage, and adaptability, qualities the Lorian Empire prized, yet often misunderstood in outsiders. Princess Viola, however, was not pleased. She had expected to see the human stumble, fail, or embarrass himself. Instead, he had risen to the occasion, and the thought irritated her more than she could admit. She paced impatiently in her private chambers, muttering under her breath. "A human, daring to challenge the traditions of our empire? It is impossible. He cannot possibly succeed." She was used to control, to superiority, to being the best at everything she attempted. Now, for the first time, someone had appeared who did not fear her, who did not bow to her mockery. That alone unsettled her. In the palace courtyard, the challenge was set. An intricate arena had been constructed, combining elements of physical obstacles, puzzles, and tactical simulations. The design reflected the Lorian philosophy: strength, intelligence, and precision all tested simultaneously. For a Lorian, it was straightforward. For an outsider, it was nearly impossible. Elias entered the arena, his expression calm and composed. He observed the setup carefully, noting every detail. The Lorian guards had underestimated him, assuming that a human's size and strength could never meet their standards. Elias knew better. Humans had always relied on adaptability, creativity, and observation. Raw power was useful, but intelligence was decisive. Viola watched from the balcony above, her eyes narrowed in anticipation. "Watch closely," she whispered. "This human will fail, and when he does, I will enjoy the sight." When he reached the top, Viola's lips twitched in surprise. He moved with a confidence and ease she had not expected. Next was the puzzle segment, a series of glowing panels that required simultaneous activation in a specific sequence. Each wrong attempt triggered a harmless but challenging setback, forcing participants to start over. The Lorian contestants relied on memory and practice, but Elias approached it differently. He observed the subtle differences in the panels, the small cues that indicated sequence. By thinking logically and testing hypotheses, he completed the puzzle with far fewer mistakes than the native participants. Viola's frown deepened. How can he do that?" she murmured. The pride she had felt in her heritage and superiority began to falter. She had believed humans were clever in small ways, but she was seeing something else entirely. Elias was not just clever, he was inventive, adaptable, and fearless. The final part of the challenge was a tactical simulation, a mock battlefield where participants had to protect a group of holographic civilians from advancing drones. The Lorian approach was predictable: form lines, use superior strength, and rely on their precise calculations. Elias, however, assessed the terrain and the behavior of the drones quickly. He guided the holographic civilians to cover, distracted the drones with strategic movements, and neutralized the threats with minimal risk. Observers gasped as the simulation concluded. Elias had not only succeeded, but had outperformed the Lorian participants by combining strategy, foresight, and adaptability. Even some of the skeptical nobles whispered to one another, questioning everything they thought they knew about humans. Viola, though, was conflicted. She had expected humiliation, yet what she saw was respect, not arrogance but quiet competence. She realized she had misjudged him entirely. The human she had mocked, the one she had thought foolish and weak, was more capable than many of her people, perhaps even more capable than some Lorian warriors. When the challenge ended, Elias was summoned to the palace hall for debriefing. He walked with his usual calm, his armor showing only minor scuffs from the obstacles. The hall was filled with nobles and attendants, all waiting to hear the verdict. Viola followed, her curiosity battling her pride. Empress Kelara observed Elias with a critical eye, as if weighing not just his abilities but his character. "Captain Elias Thorne," she began, her voice echoing through the marble chamber, "you have completed our challenge with a skill and intelligence that surpasses our expectations. Your adaptability and courage are evident in every action you have taken. I only did what I believed was necessary. Humans survive by noticing what others overlook." She had spent her life in a culture that valued predictability, precision, and strict hierarchy. Elias had shown her that unpredictability, ingenuity, and courage could change outcomes in ways her people could not anticipate. Later, Viola approached Elias in private. Though she kept her distance, her pride still intact. "Tell me," she said cautiously, "how is it that your kind survives with so little? You have no enhancements, no precision training like ours, yet you move as if you are superior." "Strength is useful, but intelligence and adaptability are decisive." Empress Kelara addressed the gathered nobles, emphasizing the importance of learning from outsiders and recognizing talent where it appeared. "Captain Elias Thorne is a symbol of ingenuity and courage," she said. "Let his actions remind us that wisdom and strength are not limited by appearance or origin." How could a human, small, seemingly fragile, possess such command over action and thought? That evening, as the twin suns set and cast a golden glow over the city, Elias sat quietly in his quarters, reviewing the day's events. He knew the challenge had accomplished more than just testing his abilities. It had shifted perceptions, opened doors, and revealed the gaps between alien assumptions and human reality. Viola, in her chambers, stared out at the city. She could not stop thinking about the human soldier who had outperformed her people. Pride warred with curiosity, and admiration stirred despite her efforts to resist it. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps humans were not what her culture had taught her to believe. Perhaps they were something more. As night fell over Zellara, the stars shining bright in the alien sky, the city seemed quieter, yet alive with possibilities. Elias had completed the challenge, but the journey was far from over. The Empress had taken note, the citizens had seen his skill, and the princess, Viola, had begun to question everything she thought she knew. Humans had arrived on Zellara not as weak outsiders, but as a force of ingenuity, courage, and unexpected strength. And as Elias prepared for the challenges yet to come, he knew one truth. Underestimation was the greatest advantage a human could have, and the story of humanity on Zellara was only beginning. The palace of Zellara was quiet in the early morning, though the city outside had already begun its usual rhythm. Markets buzzed, citizens moved purposefully, and the alien guards patrolled the streets with their usual precision. Yet within the palace walls, a different kind of activity was unfolding, one of observation, calculation, and subtle maneuvering. Captain Elias Thorne had been invited to a private audience with Empress Kalara. Unlike the ceremonial challenge, this meeting was not about proving skill. It was about understanding, a subtle test to see if a human could adapt not only in action but in thought. Elias entered the grand chamber, the high ceilings and intricate designs of alien architecture looming above him. The Empress sat behind a tall, polished desk, her posture perfect and her gaze unwavering. The courtiers were absent, leaving the space intimate and intense. Viola lingered at the side, curious but careful not to draw attention to herself. "You have impressed many in our city, Captain," Kalara began, her voice calm yet commanding. "Not merely with your skill, but with your thinking. You observe, adapt, and act in ways that are unusual for your kind. Tell me, why do humans survive, thrive even when others underestimate them? We make use of intelligence, observation, and cooperation. How can you succeed where we might fail? Humans trust each other, and that trust allows us to achieve more than the sum of our parts." She began to understand that intelligence and courage could outweigh brute strength or technological superiority. Kalara leaned forward. "You speak of trust and cooperation. These are concepts our empire struggles to grasp fully. Here, hierarchy and strength dictate outcomes. Many rely on fear, on obedience, on tradition. Humans succeed where others fail because you are not bound by these expectations. Is that correct?" "There are factions within the empire," she said quietly. "Some generals believe humans are dangerous, unpredictable anomalies. They see you as a threat, not an opportunity. Others are skeptical of our traditions, yet hesitate to challenge them openly. We must decide how to respond to this challenge to our assumptions." The schematics depicted regions of the city, areas of potential conflict, and territories controlled by various factions. He noticed patterns in the movement of troops, the placement of defenses, and the behavior of influential nobles. "It seems," he said, "that the greatest threat is not from technology or strength, but from those who refuse to see value in adaptation and insight. Understanding human thinking could help prevent unnecessary conflict." She had watched her mother interact with Elias, and she realized that humans had a subtle strength she had never appreciated. They were not defined by appearance, size, or conventional measures of power. Their greatest ability was their mind, their courage, and their willingness to act when others hesitated. She felt a flicker of admiration, and perhaps a sense of inadequacy since she had never questioned her own assumptions before. Later that day, the palace faced a sudden challenge. A group of Lorian nobles, dissatisfied with Kalara's rule, had secretly begun planning a rebellion. They believed the Empress's attention to outsiders, particularly a human, weakened the empire. Though their scheme was quiet, it had already begun to influence the city's districts. Kalara, aware of the threat, called Elias to her side. "I need your insight," she said. "You think differently than our people. Perhaps your perspective can help us see what others overlook." Reports of troop movements, secret communications, and unusual patterns in public behavior all suggested that a rebellion was brewing. But it was subtle, hidden beneath layers of normal activity. Elias noted the weak points in the nobles' plan, predicting where and when they might act. "Their plan relies on predictability," he explained. "They assume loyalty, fear, and tradition will keep the population in check. But people react to leadership and initiative. If we can show them that unity and strategic action are stronger than fear, we can prevent unnecessary chaos. It involved using a small group of trusted guards to subtly counteract the nobles' actions, protecting key areas and demonstrating leadership to inspire loyalty among citizens. It was not a violent solution, merely strategic, intelligent, and preventive. Viola listened silently. "And you expect this to succeed?" she asked, her curiosity overcoming her initial skepticism. Elias turned to her, calm and confident. "It will, if we act decisively and adapt as the situation unfolds. Humans succeed not because they are stronger, but because they notice what others miss and take advantage of opportunities others ignore." They monitored the nobles' movements, secured critical points, and ensured that any attempts at disruption were intercepted before they escalated. The operation was precise and effective, yet invisible to the average citizen. By morning, the rebellion had been quietly neutralized. Viola watched the outcome unfold from the palace balcony. She could not believe it. The human she had mocked not only survived the ceremonial challenge, but now he had prevented a rebellion through strategy and foresight. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions, pride in her heritage, frustration at being surprised, and a growing sense of respect for Elias. The following morning, Empress Kelera convened a council to address the situation. The nobles who had attempted the rebellion were summoned, though they were unaware of how close they had come to failure. The Empress's voice was firm, commanding respect. "This empire values strength, intelligence, and loyalty. Attempts to disrupt unity will not be tolerated. Learn from today that foresight and strategy, not brute force alone, protect what we hold dear." Later, in the quiet of her chambers, Viola reflected on everything she had seen. For the first time, she questioned the beliefs that had shaped her entire life. Humans, she realized, were not defined by what they lacked. They were defined by how they used what they had, how they thought, and how they acted. Their unpredictability, their courage, and their ingenuity made them powerful in ways her people had never considered. Elias, in his quarters, prepared for the next day. The city was calm, but he knew the work was far from over. The Lorian Empire was vast, full of traditions and assumptions that would challenge every step he took, yet he was undeterred. Humans thrived where others underestimated them, and now he had shown a small part of what his kind could achieve. Viola, too, could not rest. Her thoughts were consumed by the human who had quietly, without fanfare, changed her perspective. She wondered what else he could do, what other lessons he might teach, and whether she was ready to accept that humans could be more than she had ever imagined. By nightfall, the city of Zelara had returned to its normal rhythm. The citizens went about their routines, the guards patrolled with usual precision, and the palace lights glowed softly in the evening sky. But the perception of humans had shifted, subtly but permanently. What was once seen as weakness was now recognized as potential. What was once mocked could now inspire. And in the quiet of her chambers, Princess Viola whispered to herself, almost unconsciously, "Perhaps we have underestimated them all along." Humans had survived, thrived, and changed perceptions before, and here on Zelara they would do so again. The story of humanity was growing, not through conquest, but through understanding, strategy, and action. And those who doubted them, especially Princess Viola, would soon see that underestimation was humanity's greatest advantage. The morning air in Zelara carried the familiar sense of spice markets and the soft hum of machinery. Despite the previous day's events, life in the city moved with its usual rhythm. Citizens walked through the streets, merchants called out their wares, and guards patrolled with the precision that marked the Lorian Empire. Yet beneath this calm, a different kind of tension lingered, one that revolved around the unusual presence of Captain Elias Thorne. Princess Viola, however, was restless. The lessons of the past days weighed on her, stirring conflicting emotions. She had mocked Elias at first, convinced he was inferior, and yet he had proven himself repeatedly, not through arrogance or loud displays of strength, but through intelligence, patience, and action. Each success of his chipped away at her assumptions and pride. She summoned him to the palace, not as a formal challenge this time, but with a task designed to test him further. "Captain Thorne," she said, her tone carefully controlled, "I have a mission for you. A group of border tribes has been difficult to negotiate with. They have refused to follow the Empire's rules and have caused tension along our trade routes. You will go to speak with them." "What is the goal of this mission?" In her mind, the tribes were fierce and dangerous, and the human before her seemed, by appearance alone, inadequate. Yet she was curious. If he succeeded, it would confirm what she had begun to suspect, that humans were capable of thinking and acting beyond expectations. Elias prepared for the journey, packing the essentials and reviewing what information he could gather about the tribes. His approach was methodical, blending observation with empathy, understanding with strategy. Unlike some of the Lorian envoys, he did not assume that intimidation would guarantee cooperation. He believed in negotiation, understanding, and showing respect in ways that often went unnoticed by those blinded by arrogance. The journey to the borderlands was long, the landscape shifting from polished city streets to rough stone paths and sparse vegetation. The tribes were known for their strong sense of independence and pride. Many envoys had tried to convince them to submit to the Empire's authority, but most had returned with failure and embarrassment. Elias, however, relied on his ability to adapt, to read situations quickly and to approach problems creatively. When he arrived at the largest tribal village, he noticed their defenses immediately, not in the form of walls or weapons alone, but in their rituals, symbols, and the way they observed newcomers. He approached slowly, using open gestures and calm movements. He spoke with respect, listening before offering solutions, asking questions that demonstrated curiosity rather than judgment. The tribal leaders were cautious, wary of outsiders. Yet Elias did not rush, nor did he attempt to impress them with tales of human technology or strength. Instead, he shared stories of cooperation, trade, and mutual benefit, explaining how working together could ensure safety and prosperity for both the Empire and the tribes. He demonstrated understanding of their customs, showing that he had observed and adapted to their ways rather than imposing foreign rules. Viola, watching from a distance via a secure communication device, could not believe what she was seeing. The human she had mocked was navigating a situation that she herself would have found challenging, and he was succeeding through intelligence, patience, and respect. He was proving a concept that her culture had never truly understood. Power could come from insight, not only from strength or position. Over several days, Elias negotiated carefully, addressing concerns, correcting misunderstandings, and offering compromises that honored the tribes' traditions while protecting the interests of the Empire. Each decision he made reflected a balance of strategy and empathy, a combination rarely seen in Lorian envoys. Slowly, the tribal leaders began to trust him, not out of fear, but because they recognized the sincerity of his actions and the logic of his proposals. By the time the mission concluded, the tribes had agreed to maintain peaceful trade, and agreements were formalized with rituals that respected their customs. Elias had achieved what many thought impossible without resorting to force or intimidation. When he returned to the palace, Viola was waiting. She did not speak immediately, for she was struggling with her pride. Instead, she watched as he dismounted and reported the results to the Empress. His words were clear, concise, and respectful, conveying not just the outcome but the reasoning behind every decision. Kilara listened, her expression calm, and then looked to Viola. "The human has succeeded where many of our own envoys have failed," she said. "Observe carefully, Princess. There is much to learn from this example." Later that day, Viola sought Elias privately. "I watched everything you did with the tribes," she began, her voice tentative. I did not expect your approach to succeed, and yet it did. How do you know what to do?" Humans survive by thinking differently and by working together. Over the following days, Viola found herself testing Elias in small ways. She presented minor challenges, not out of malice, but to see if he would respond as he had before. Each time, he adapted quickly, solving problems with calm intelligence, demonstrating that humans were capable of thinking on multiple levels simultaneously. She began to respect him, though she did not fully admit it. Each success of his forced her to reconsider everything she had believed about humans. She noticed how he remained humble, never boasting, never seeking praise, even as he demonstrated skill and ingenuity beyond her expectations. The Empress, observing these interactions, began to speak of Elias more openly in council meetings. She highlighted his ability to teach through example, to show that intelligence, strategy, and adaptability were as valuable as strength or technology. The nobles were intrigued, though some remained skeptical. The perception of humans within the Empire was slowly changing, from curiosity and amusement to respect and acknowledgement. One evening, after a long day of observation and discussion, Viola approached Elias alone. "I must admit," she said, her voice quieter than usual, I never imagined a human could accomplish what you have. You have changed my perspective, though I am still unsure how to feel about it. Understanding comes next. Humans survive by noticing the unexpected, by learning from every experience, and by acting with clarity. You can observe and learn the same way. She also realized that her own assumptions had limited her vision, and that perhaps she had much to learn, not only about humans, but about leadership and understanding. The next day, the city of Zelara continued its normal activities, but the influence of Elias was evident. Traders, soldiers, and citizens spoke quietly about the human soldier, whose intelligence and skill had prevented conflict and achieved outcomes no one thought possible. Even those who remained skeptical could not ignore the changes his actions had inspired. As evening fell, Elias prepared for another day of challenges, aware that his actions were shaping not only his own reputation, but the perception of his entire species. He knew the journey was far from over, and that the real tests of adaptability, strategy, and understanding were yet to come. Viola watched him from the palace balcony, her mind filled with thoughts she could barely organize. She was beginning to recognize a fundamental truth. Humans were not defined by their size, their technology, or their appearance. They were defined by their courage, their ingenuity, and their willingness to act when others hesitated. And as the stars appeared over the twin suns, casting silver light across the city, Viola understood that her perspective had changed. She would no longer mock humans. She would watch, learn, and perhaps, in time, respect them fully. Elias Thorne had proven that humans could accomplish the impossible not through power alone, but through intelligence, adaptability, and courage. And that lesson was only beginning to unfold across Zelara. The city of Zelara was alive with movement, though the palace itself was quiet in preparation for the ceremony. Empress Kelara had summoned the court, and all nobles, advisors, and dignitaries gathered in the grand hall. Rumors had spread of the human captain who had achieved what many of the empire's finest had failed to do: navigate impossible challenges, prevent conflict, and negotiate peace with the border tribes. Now, the entire court awaited the Empress's judgment. Captain Elias Thorne stood near the edge of the hall, his posture calm, his expression composed. He had long since grown accustomed to the whispers and curious stares, yet he showed no arrogance. Humans did not need to boast. Their actions spoke for themselves. He had acted with intelligence, patience, and courage, and the results were evident. Princess Viola, positioned at her mother's side, could hardly remain composed. The past weeks had shifted her perspective entirely. She had mocked Elias at first, fully expecting him to fail. Yet every challenge, every mission, every subtle test he had faced had been met with ingenuity, strategy, and humility. She felt a mixture of awe, confusion, and frustration. How could someone so different, so unlike the Lorian warriors, accomplish what they could not? The Empress rose from her throne, her voice commanding silence throughout the hall. "Citizens of Zelara, nobles of our empire, and esteemed guests," she began, her tone measured and firm. "Today we acknowledge an achievement that defies expectations. Captain Elias Thorne, a human from a distant world, has demonstrated courage, intelligence, and adaptability in ways we have never seen before. He has not only succeeded in our ceremonial challenges, but he has prevented conflict and negotiated peace where many thought failure was inevitable." Elias bowed politely, his eyes meeting the Empress's with steady confidence. "Captain Thorne," Kelara continued, "your actions have reminded us that strength alone is not the measure of greatness. Intelligence, understanding, and the willingness to act decisively are equally vital. Humans have shown us what our own traditions often overlook. Therefore, I command this court to recognize his accomplishments, to respect his insight, and to learn from his example." Bowing to an outsider, a human, challenged everything they had been taught about hierarchy, power, and loyalty. Yet they knew better than to disobey the Empress. Slowly, the nobles inclined their heads in respect, acknowledging Elias not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of humanity's unique capabilities. All eyes then turned to Princess Viola. Her heart raced. She had expected this moment with disbelief, perhaps even indignation, but now she faced a truth she could not ignore. Elias Thorne had proven himself time and again, not through aggression or arrogance, but through intelligence, humility, and courage. He had succeeded where many of her people had failed, showing that humans were not merely outsiders. They were capable of extraordinary things. She stepped forward, her posture stiff with a mixture of pride and admiration. For a moment she hesitated, her mind racing through everything she had seen in the past days. The challenges, the negotiation with the tribes, the subtle strategies he had employed. Her pride struggled against her growing respect, yet she knew what was right. Slowly, deliberately, she bowed. The gesture was both acknowledgement and humility, a recognition of Elias' achievements and the lessons he had taught her without ever seeking recognition. The hall fell silent, and then a wave of whispered approval spread among the courtiers. Many had been skeptical of humans, yet here was undeniable proof of their ingenuity, courage, and value. Elias inclined his head respectfully, a faint smile on his lips. He did not gloat. Humans, he knew, led through action and example, not through force or display. The respect he had earned was a reflection of what he had done, not what he claimed to be. The Empress regarded both of them with quiet satisfaction. "Let this be a lesson for all," she said. "Greatness is not defined by appearance, origin, or strength alone. It is defined by action, insight, and the courage to act when others hesitate. Captain Elias Thorne has reminded us that there is much to learn from the unexpected, and that adaptability, intelligence, and humility can change the course of events more than any weapon ever could." She felt a warmth of respect that she had not anticipated, a recognition of his intelligence and character that went beyond admiration. She realized that humans were not only capable, but extraordinary in their ability to think differently, to adapt, and to lead through example. The court slowly relaxed, conversations spreading quietly among the nobles. Many discussed the lessons they had observed, the need to reconsider their assumptions, and the value of humans in a way that had never been imagined. The perception of humanity in the Lorian Empire had shifted, subtly yet permanently. Outside the palace, the city of Zelara continued its life, though now with a sense of awe and curiosity about the human soldier. Traders, guards, and citizens spoke quietly of his actions, of his ingenuity, and of the fact that one human had changed the perception of an entire empire. Children whispered stories of the man who faced impossible challenges with calm intelligence, and even some of the more skeptical citizens began to reconsider what they thought they knew. Later, in the quiet of her chambers, Viola reflected on everything that had happened. She remembered the moments she had mocked Elias, the expectations she had held, and the surprises that followed. She realized that humans' greatest strength was not in raw power or technology, but in intelligence, adaptability, courage, and the ability to act when others hesitated. Her thoughts returned to the lessons she had learned from observation, from witnessing him in action, and from seeing the results of his decisions. She understood now that strength could be measured in many ways, and that humans excelled in areas that her people had overlooked for centuries. Elias, meanwhile, returned to his quarters, quietly reviewing the day's events. He knew that his actions had shifted perceptions, and that the journey was far from over. The Lorian Empire was vast, full of traditions and assumptions, and every day would present new challenges. Yet he remained confident. Humans survived and thrived where others underestimated them, and he had proven that his kind could change minds and hearts through insight, patience, and courage. That evening, the twin suns set over the city, casting long shadows across the towers and streets. Viola walked through the palace gardens, thinking of what had transpired. She had been humbled, challenged, and enlightened. Elias had shown her that humans could accomplish the impossible not through force, but through intelligence, adaptability, and unwavering courage. As night fell, the stars appeared above Zelara, shining brightly in the alien sky. The city seemed calm, yet alive with new possibilities. The story of humanity was no longer one of underestimation and mockery. It was one of respect, curiosity, and admiration. Elias Thorne had changed not just the perception of a princess or a court, but the understanding of an entire empire. Viola returned to the palace balcony, gazing at the horizon. She thought of the lessons learned, of the courage she had witnessed, and of the humility required to recognize true greatness. She knew that humans were not merely visitors or outsiders. They were partners in thought, strategy, and action. She had learned that the most valuable strength often comes from intelligence, insight, and the willingness to act decisively. In the quiet of her chambers, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "Perhaps we have underestimated them all along." He had earned respect, not through arrogance or display, but through action and integrity. The human spirit, resilient, inventive, and courageous, had left an indelible mark on the Lorian Empire. And as the stars reflected off the palace towers, it was clear that this was only the beginning of humanity's story on Zelara. Humans had arrived not as conquerors, but as equals through insight, courage, and ingenuity. They had proven that respect could be earned without force, that leadership could be shown through action, and that even the most proud and rigid empire could learn from those who thought differently. Viola finally smiled, a quiet, sincere acknowledgement of everything Elias had shown her. The princess who once mocked the human soldier now understood his value, and through that understanding, she began to see the possibilities of a new partnership between humans and the Lorian Empire. And as the night deepened, the stars above Zellara glimmered like a promise, signaling the beginning of a new chapter. Humans were no longer underestimated, no longer dismissed, and no longer mocked. They had earned their place not through dominance, but through courage, intelligence, and the quiet power of action. Elias Thorne had shown them the truth. Greatness comes in many forms, and humanity's story was just beginning, one calculated, thoughtful, and courageous step at a time.